Hi guys, welcome to Theology Explained. I'm Jem. Today we're talking about Jubilee. Jubilee is found in Leviticus 25. It's a year, it's a celebration, but where does it come from? So it actually begins with Sabbath. Sabbath is the seventh day that God creates. It's a day that he rests, it's a day that he delights in creation, but it's a day that he sets apart to make holy. And Sabbath is a foundation for sevens, and sevens become really important to Israelites. And so the seventh day is the Sabbath. On the seventh month of the year, there's a festival. On the seventh year in a row, you have the fallow year, where you rest for a whole year. And the year is set apart to be holy, and the land gets to restore itself and to heal from being worked by an agrarian society, by farmers. And then on the seventh cycle of the seventh year, you have Jubilee. And the Year of Jubilee takes into account the fallow year, that seventh year, and in the same way it's very much about resting the land, and you don't work for an entire year. But Jubilee takes it to a next level. But let's start with the word Jubilee. So it comes from this Hebrew word Yobel, and the word Yobel is given because the Year of Jubilee starts on the Day of Atonement. Now, the Day of Atonement is the holiest day of the year. So remember, the Sabbath is set apart, it's made holy. The fallow year, it's made holy. This Year of Jubilee is so holy, it's even named after the day that it starts on, the holiest day of the year, the Day of Atonement. And if we zoom out a bit, so Year of Jubilee is in chapter 25 of Leviticus, but remember that Leviticus is all about being holy, and it's all about dwelling in God's presence. And how do we do that? We do that by becoming holy. And then we get this year, Jubilee. It's literally starting on the Day of Atonement, on the holiest day of the year. And that theme of holiness is coming from Sabbath and going all the way into Jubilee, the 49th year, the seventh cycle of the fallow year, or the seventh year. Jubilee then comes to mean release because of what happens during this year. And this oversimplification of Jubilee is just that debts are released. But it takes place in sort of two main forms: land and slaves, or people. So let's say that you needed a bit of money, so you sell off a bit of your land. So they're all farmers, so they have land. In the Year of Jubilee, it's returned to you. And let's say you're so poor that you needed to sell yourself to work off your debts. You're released from that. And there's this specific commandment to go back to your family and be with them for a year, a whole year. Through releasing the land and releasing people from their debts who have been working them off, they regain this dignity. They regain a social status. It means that slavery is limited. It will never last someone's entire lifetime. In one lecture I watched, the lecturer said, Sabbath is a holistic vision of the world made new, and Jubilee is acting on that vision in a way to restore creation. But why do you release land back, and why do you set these slaves free? In verse 38, it says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, to give you the land of Canaan, and to be your God. One, God gave you this land in the first place, and he set you free. But two, God is your God. He has been faithful, and he will be faithful. It becomes this declaration of faith. And that's what the Jubilee year really is. It's a declaration of faith, especially in the slavery aspect. There's this deliberate language used in verse 39, where God says, don't treat the poor who have to work off their debts like slaves. And it's directed at Israelites. Because he's saying, I've already set you free from slavery. You're never going to be a slave again. So don't ever be treated as a slave. It's a permanent freedom given to the Israelites by God, that even when they are acting like slaves, they will never be treated like a slave. It even comes back to Sabbath again. Because remember, if you're a slave, you never choose when you work. So a Sabbath is that choice. It's that choice that God gave them, gave the Israelites anyway. They don't have to work. They're not slaves. They never will be slaves, so rest when you can. Take an entire day to rest. John Mark Comer, in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, comments on the two different reasons that Moses gives for Sabbath. So in Exodus, it says God took a Sabbath day. He made it holy, and we should mimic that rhythm of grace. But then in Deuteronomy, it says, because God set you free, observe the Sabbath. But remember, Jubilee is pointing to Sabbath, or Sabbath is pointing to Jubilee. And it's that whole imagery of you've been set free, as well as the rhythm of rest, which even God took. Jubilee plays a huge role in social justice. Robert North says this about the Jubilee year. The Jubilee was intended to prevent the accumulation of the wealth in the hands of the very few. The biblical law is opposed to unbridled capitalism and thoroughgoing communism, where all property is in state hands. So North is specifically making that point of land, and he's saying that it is directly going against any state that tries to say that they really own anything. But if we were to read it in a more modern day setting, it would be talking about companies like Amazon or PepsiCo or Coke or Disney. They're unable to amass wealth beyond a certain amount of time. They would have to give all of it back and give it away. The other way that Jubilee deeply speaks into social justice is that it is economic. It's economic because it's saying that you can't work for an entire year. So if year 7 is taken off, then year 6 needs to be worked very hard. If it's an agrarian society where you just farm, it means you're not allowed to harvest on year 7, but you're not allowed to plant either. Which means if you're not planting in year 7, that means that you're not going to be harvesting in year 8. So year 6 is going to need to last through year 7, through year 8, and into year 9. Every 7 years, you do that. And Jubilee adopts that from the fallow year. It also does that. And the Israelites create this economy that is structured on God's provision. And it's just focusing, because on that 7th year, it is God will provide for me. God will sustain me. Even in that 8th year when you're not harvesting either. And that's the magnitude of Jubilee. It is community reliant. It is deeply challenging to any economic structure that has ever existed. It is deeply challenging to the big names of communism and capitalism. One part about Jubilee made me very interested specifically on the slavery aspect. If people were being set free, imagine something like the sex industry, riddled with slavery. It would collapse. All of those slaves would be set free. All of them would be redignified. It would be unbelievable, to say the least, but it would be so good. The final point about Jubilee. How does Jubilee relate to the New Testament? There was a talk that Tom Wright recently did at the end of Thy Kingdom Come, where he spoke about this exact concept and the relationship between the New Testament and the Year of Jubilee. And you find it in Luke 4, verses 18 and 19. Jesus quotes Isaiah 61, and he says, "He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." The acceptable year of the Lord is the Jubilee year. It means that the Jubilee year is not only looking back to the sovereignty of God over the land, the freedom that God has bestowed upon his people, but it's also looking forward to the restoration of all things that's spoken about in Acts 4. The restoration of all dignities, the restoration of people living in poverty, the restoration of those who've suffered trauma, those who've been trafficked. Jubilee is radical, to say the least. Over the past 6 weeks, I've been studying with Tear Fund, studying about how theology and social justice are deeply interdependent. They asked us to fundraise through this challenge of the climb. Sadly, I managed to hurt my ankle, so I was unable to do the climb. But me and my amazing friend Amy have been doing these online gigs. We did one today, and it was 5 hours. We did 2.5 hours each, and I was not expecting it to be as painful as it was, but it really, really was. And we're doing another one at the end of this week, on Sunday the 14th of June. Below, I'm linking to my Just Giving. I would love it if anyone comes across this and wants to donate. If the giving page has been closed by now, please go to Tear Fund and support them, because they're just doing amazing work. At this moment in time, it's during the pandemic. Tear Fund have been able to help over 1.25 million people. They've installed nearly 500 water stations to help people living in poverty still stay clean and combat the virus. They've given out over 20,000 packages of hygiene products and sanitary products. They've given out over 3,500 food packages, and they've given out over £115,000 in food vouchers and cash. This poverty relief program has gone across 22 different countries. I would love it if you guys were able to support Tear Fund. Just give what you can, donate what you can. They're an amazing charity. I've loved learning from them and being challenged in so many ways about how my discipleship and my journey with Christ is deeply involved with helping those in need and those who are marginalised. It would be strange to talk about justice and not talk about the Black Lives Matter movement that has blown up over the past few weeks over the outrage of George Floyd's death. I know that I have an incredibly small influence on this platform. I don't even have 50 subscribers yet, but I also think that not speaking out is part of the problem. But I'm going to use any sphere of influence I possibly can to try and make a change, if I'm able to. Carl Lentz made an amazing point in one of his talks where he said, of course we need to focus on the Black Lives Matter movement, and it doesn't belittle the lives of so many other people. He makes this point that it would be the same if someone came up to Jesus when he's speaking through the Beatitudes and Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, and someone says, no Jesus, blessed are all people. It's just ridiculous. Of course all lives are valuable. That's why Black Lives Matter. When they have a system built against them, when they have a system made to benefit people like me, people who are well off, white, British. So I'm going to use my privilege, I'm going to learn, I'm going to educate myself, and I'm going to speak out when I can. And this, I guess, is one of my ways. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I'll see you later.